Folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
Hilary, talk to me just a little bit about how did you get into ranching? I know you married into it, I think, but tell me, how did you get into ranching in the Anderson clan here?
Since I was very young, I loved horses. And if you love horses, eventually you become inspired by the idea of being a cowboy. So despite the place where I grew up being very different, which was Detroit and around southeastern Michigan, I always wanted to be a cowboy. And so I took my horse interest and followed it out to Montana. And it was really horses that kind of drew me and gave me the foot in the door, I guess, because I quickly got different jobs working with horses on different small ranches outside of Missoula. And one thing led to another, and horse work out here quickly becomes interwoven with cattle work. And so I just slowly started gaining more and more experience, and that's how it started for me.
So you have a degree in biology, wildlife biology, or just tell me if I'm not correct.
Yep.
Kind of tell me what it is. So why did you have that degree, and how were you able to use it? Kind of give you a little bit of the idea of what your career track was and what you do with your wildlife biology degree.
Sure. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be a vet. Along with being a cowboy, I realized that cowboy wasn't actually a career I could pursue, at least so I thought. And so I wanted to be a vet. And one day I was driving to school and saw a little picture at the bottom of a magazine article I was reading with Doug Smith collaring a wolf in Yellowstone. And that was just the moment where it was like, oh my gosh, like I had never heard of anything like that. And I loved animals. I loved wide open, wild spaces. And all of a sudden it was that picture that gave me the idea of this whole other world out there. And so it was horses that really helped me along the way, but I always had my eye on the wolf as well. And so I got to Montana and was simultaneous with the horse work and the ranch work, started going to school at University of Montana and chose wildlife biology and just set my sights on that. And so it quickly turned interesting because I was working on ranches, and that was kind of the life and the income and the culture. But at school, I was taking these wildlife classes and really, really interested in the wolf reintroduction happening in Yellowstone. So I just kind of kept going on both of those tracks. And interestingly, wolves and ranching out here quickly intersects in interesting ways.
So give me a little bit about what did you do as a biologist? Just kind of give me this elevator speech about being a wildlife biologist, a little bit about your credentials, kind of what you've done. And then let's go back to that intersection of cattle ranching and predators. So give me the elevator speech about your career as a wildlife biologist. What did you do and where did you do it? And tie in, I assume, you did a lot of research on that passion you had for wolves.
Sure. So to begin, right as the day I graduated college, I actually missed graduation and I headed to Canada. And that was my first job. It was working on a wolf predation study up right outside of Banff. And that was my first job. Andrew came with me. He was an outfitter and I was a wildlife biologist, and that was the beginning of all of it for me. That job encompassed a lot, from tracking and trapping wolves to then following the collar data around to different kills or cluster sites where GPS points from a wolf cluster up. You go to those clusters and you investigate, and perhaps you find a kill. And that was kind of the deep dive into many aspects, from wolf biology and ecology to wolf management and the human social pieces that affect or are interwoven with all of that. And from there, eventually, we left Canada and I got a job in Yellowstone, and that was really the dream job, and stayed there working. I think all that I did in Yellowstone was always some sort of predation related study. Yellowstone has several different studies or facets of focuses in wolf behavior and whatnot. And I think I was always on some sort of predation related project. So winter, spring, summer, the whole year round.
So your emphasis in the scientific realm has always been on that relationship, that predator-prey relationship. So now, you mentioned earlier, this juxtaposition of going from being a scientific researcher to now being, in the cattle industry, through, the Andersons family and what they're doing. Of course, you're seeing all this now living in Montana. Tell me a little bit, how does all that work? I mean, it's a lot of ranchers are really vehemently anti-predator, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are ranchers that aren't. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that.
I think that I'll speak for myself and my own story first. And I think that looking back, part of my perspective, or a huge part of my perspective, comes from the fact that I was not born into any of this. And so my pursuit of both ranching and conservation came with no biases. I didn't come with a story. I didn't come with an identity. I didn't come with an expectation for something to be a certain way. And so I think that I just simply saw it for what it was. In being part of different ranching communities and talking with people and living it now myself for a few decades, I think that a lot of people come into this conversation with a predetermined story about how it is or how it should be. And because of that, it's kind of like wearing a pair of sunglasses and forgetting that you have them on. Like, you just see the world through that lens, and it's really not until you have the ability to remove that lens that you're like, oh my gosh. And those are paradigms, those are beliefs, those are stories that are interwoven with our identities that are very hard to start separating. But if you are able to do that, even just a little bit, all of a sudden, all of these questions and all of these potentials start to reveal themselves, and you can't just live in the old, this is the one way and the only way. And so I think that for me, when I'm out on the landscape, living alongside wolves, bears, cattle, whatnot, they all have an interesting place. And I don't see the landscape, my husband doesn't see the landscape as something for us to use and get rid of the pieces that are inconvenient for us. We really see it as this joy, this beautiful opportunity to figure out how do we actually live in a more fulfilling relationship with all the lives around us. And that's really what makes it worth living. To just be at war, to be hateful, to be frustrated, that's just not how we want to live our life. I think the other really tricky piece to all of this is that ranching and agriculture in general was really founded on this idea of human domination over certain lives for the sake of human comfort and convenience and life. And so the whole system is something that the wolf and the grizzly bear really call all of this into question in a really interesting way. And it is hard when you as a rancher make money by selling cows. When that is the case, your tendency is to look at all other lives as resources in service to the cow. And the tricky part with that is you end up manipulating all of these other lives in service of this one species, which is then in service to you. And what we're learning, what Andrew and I are learning, is that that isn't really working anymore. And it's certainly not a fulfilling way to live. That is not what draws us out here. Yet a lot of people, including us, if you don't have cattle to sell, then you lose the ranch, or you go out of business, or you get jobs in town and you spend your whole day off of the ranch. And so there's this really real financial piece that while very few ranchers live the reality of wolves and bears impacting that financial piece to the point of much significance, it triggers that piece. And that financial stress runs deep. And that's real. That's real, and it stifles creativity. When people feel stressed, they don't take risk. They aren't creative. When they feel they need to protect themselves and defend themselves, that is not the mindset we need for looking at this new landscape, so to speak, in a more holistic way. So I do believe financial stress plays a huge role. I don't think wolves and grizzly bears contribute a whole lot to financial stress, but they contribute some, and they certainly contribute to stress in general.
Yeah, we have, there was a rancher over on the Rocky Mountain front, small operator, not a lot of big acreage, not big head, not large number of stock, but they were dealing with some predation issues. And, being a cow-calf operator, you only get paid once a year. And so they definitely they've changed how they do their calving, and, they're trying to be as proactive as possible, but they're not real happy that there's that many grizzly bears on the landscape. So what would you say to somebody, to a rancher? I mean, because you guys all run into each other and see each other. What would you to say to somebody there that's really expressing not liking to have to deal with grizzly bears, in a scenario like that?
I don't know what I would say to them, but what I do know is that ranches in general are struggling. And no one who's struggling in any sort of circumstance, when your capacity is diminished for whatever reason, adding just another thing, nobody accepts that well. Nobody handles that well. And so I have really taken the approach that if the ranch or the business is strong, it ultimately is resilient to any number of different challenges and changes that come along. And the problem right now is that a lot of ranches are barely hanging on as it is. And that has nothing to do with wolves and bears. It has to do with traditions and systems such as the cattle, the livestock industry that actually aren't serving us anymore. And so to just pile on one more thing that you have to do to barely hang, after you're barely hanging on is tough. So, and sometimes it's impossible. For ranches that are smaller like that, or are semi-livelihood dependent, meaning people have jobs in town, maybe there's some resources that go to the ranch on a daily basis, maybe not. Those ranches have, what I've seen, when they work together in some sort of community sort of program, that has been very beneficial, because no one ranch has to hire range riders, has to figure it all out. There's a group, and there's usually outside funding, and a couple riders can serve an entire community. A couple services can service an entire community. So that has been a fairly positive approach. But yeah, I guess what I would say is just that I'm sorry and I feel for you, and how can we work together to try to make this better.
That's great. So staying on that track there, we're talking about range riding and stuff, and you guys have a big allotment there in the Centennials down there in the valley, where I came to visit you guys this summer. They're a very large concentration of predators on the landscape there. You guys have a shitload of cattle out there. And I happened to be there the one day that you lost one to a grizzly bear. Talk to me about how you can coexist as a rancher in that type of environment with that number of cattle on the landscape, what you have to do in order to make it work. And then let's kind of just lead into, that actual situation. We took the ATVs up. You wanted to get some trail cams on there. Talk to me about why you wanted the trail cameras there. And then the last thing is, and I'll ask you that question like I asked you and Andrew that night, was how does it make you feel? And Andrew says, well, no one's ever asked that question before. Yeah. Well, I know, I want to know. So kind of give me this whole idea. You're in this place. You have 50,000 acre allotment, a Forest Service ground. It's very remote. Is some of it part of wilderness area too, I think, or adjacent
possibly.
to?
Yeah.
So talk to me. What is it like to be able to raise cattle in that type of environment? Kind of explain it to me a little bit.
I think that Andrew and I probably have perhaps a unique perspective on getting to live and ranch in country like that. And the perspective is just simply that it's amazing. It's absolutely incredible. And we consider ourselves incredibly lucky every single day to get to be out there. And so approaching it like that, I think helps because we just consider it a really neat opportunity, a really neat adventure every day.
Describe to me, where are we when we're there? What is this place? What does it look like? What does it feel like?
So the West Fork is it takes about 45 minutes on really, really rough 2 tracks to get up to where we park. And then we have to ride down or take ATVs down into the cow camp. And from there, there's just this huge riparian corridor, which is the West Fork of the Madison, full of very densely covered in willows. And then on the south side, it goes up into a lot of forest. The north side is more open sagebrush until you get even higher up into the very rocky, rugged mountains, steep country, hard country, lot of wildlife. And so the cattle kind of graze down the West Fork throughout the latter part of the summer into the fall. So we move with the cattle. We come back and forth to the cow camp every night, and some days it's several hours just to get out to the cattle from the cow camp. And yeah, we have 4 kids, and most of them are back there with us. Our oldest son, he's 17, so he's doing some of his own stuff as well. But for most of the summer, we're all out there and back there together, and go between our house in the valley and the cow camp in the West Fork.
So talk to me about that night, that day I got there. What occurred, and what did we do, and why did we do it?
So when we got the permit, there was a history of grizzly bear livestock conflicts, a fairly significant history. And so right out of the gate, we wanted to do something different. So we chose a few things to change. One was that we decided to put twice as many cows back there for half the amount of time. We also wanted to run yearling heifers instead of cow-calf pairs. And so that is our scene. We have about 1,200 to 1,500 animals back there, yearling heifers, and they're in big groups, a very big herd, highly concentrated, moving across the landscape. The challenge is that obviously it's very hard to keep track of that many animals, especially yearlings. They travel, they don't necessarily work together as one big herd unit. And so in one case the other thing with the West Fork is there are no northern fences. In a few of the pastures, there's these really steep rocky cliffs that kind of serve as a natural barrier that cattle can't get beyond. But in this particular pasture farthest east, there's not only no fence, but it's fairly easy going out of the pasture. So we knew that these heifers were working their way up, and we knew that some were on their way out of the pasture. So we were riding, and we were trying to get them back down. And Andrew came across a little group. He knew some had headed way up there, and so he went on a search and gathered up a bunch. And as he's coming down, he's gathering little groups of them. And there's a little group, and sure enough, one's dead right out there in the meadow, right off the 2-track heading up to the mesa, and fresh dead, not hardly fed on. And so he marks the spot and comes back home, where we all met up. And so later that night, one thing with suspected kills or any loss, I guess, one thing with any loss out there is if you have grizzlies on the land, you have a very short amount of time before the animal is either taken by the bears or completely consumed. And so it's a very small window to find something that dies, figure out why it died, and do anything about it. And so we headed back out there with you in the dark to go find the carcass. Couldn't find her. The bear had dragged her into the forest. And I set that camera up to see which bear, because we do have several bears, and I was curious. I'm always curious what the bears are doing and how they're using space and why they choose to be in one place and not another. And it turns out that the bear that killed that heifer was a new bear, or not new to the area, but new to us. We didn't have previous experience with that bear. And so got to know him that way, and within 2 days he had eaten, the carcass was pretty much cleaned up, and he held that carcass the whole time. No other bears came in, and that's pretty unique too, because usually on carcasses there's several bears coming in throughout the time, and he held it and he ate the whole thing.
Were you worried that might create a bear that was going to start to predate on more than one cow at that point in time?
Yeah, that particular bear, that cow was probably maybe his 10th that summer. this last summer, he had a good roll of them with the neighbors too.
So he had an appetite for
yeah,
beef.
he knew what he was doing, and he knew what he wanted.
And I asked you guys, you and Andrew, that question: how does it make you feel? We're sitting there looking at this dead cow that had been killed by this grizzly bear that had an appetite for beef. How did it make you guys feel? I mean, really, give me your perspective. I know Andrew talked about it on camera, but how did you feel? And how do you feel about the predation of your livestock? Because it does affect, you guys to some level. Even if it's not to hopefully get bears accustomed to eating and creating conflict, right? Right. Not even the financial side of things, yeah.
Right. Well, it's an interesting range of feelings because, to begin, we went into this situation. We go on to this landscape understanding with the full awareness that grizzly bears, tall larkspur, bad weather, fires, they're all possible and they're all gonna happen. And so there is a certain level of acceptance that we have when we lose, we've lost 10 in a night, 12 in a night from tall larkspur poisoning, and none of it's ever happy, and we're never indifferent, but there is a certain level of acceptance of the wild nature of the space that we're cohabitating in. So what I would say is that it does not make us feel angry. It does not make us feel frustrated. It does make us feel curious. We do ask a lot of questions, and we're absolutely trying to minimize and prevent problems, prevent loss for all the reasons. Pneumonia. This year we had really tough weight gain. We're always trying to do a good job, but we do accept the challenges. So with that said, there's nothing easy or comforting looking at a dead animal that probably went through a very horrific experience. And when you see that bear on film from the cameras, he's magnificent, and there's nothing other than awe that we have for him. And so what our approach is really, how can we make the ranch is in sync with nature and the flow and aligned with nature's principles as we can, while still making a living out there. And the huge piece to that is scale, which gets to not a level of indifference, but it certainly helps. So for example, my kids have 6 sheep and they have 12 chickens, and they know they've raised every lamb, every chicken from a baby, know their names, are with them every single day. They're very individual, personal relationships. We absolutely care about our cattle and deeply connect with them, but there's much less of a one-to-one relationship when you're working with a lot of animals than there is when you're just working with 6 really cute lambs. And so there's no question that, like, when a bear ripped the door off the chicken coop later this summer and killed all the chickens, that was much harder for the whole family to deal with than the cattle. So there's the emotional part with those really special relationships that we have, and there's just the understanding that it's part of where we live and part of how we live.
I have to say that was fantastic.
Oh,
really great stuff. Great way to summarize everything and kind of get things in perspective and stuff. And definitely, I heard several perfect comments.
Good. Okay. Well, good.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.